Hi, welcome to another Inertia Creeps episode. Today I'm joined by Rachel Gotto. This is a particularly interesting one for me because, you know, as I've said before, we're very much a believer in the standards we walk past or the standards we accept. And what I like about this conversation is, Rachel, you're very much somebody who comes with life experience and layers and trauma and loss and but also an entrepreneurial spirit, somebody who has embraced life in a really unique way and probably was, you know, from the get-go through your parents embraced life. We're going to get into all of this, particularly the fact that Rachel ended up in Ireland on a boat with her parents on her way to New Zealand and they ended up staying here. It's a fascinating story. But what I wanted to introduce you properly, and I'm actually going to read it because I never do this, but I'm going to read it because I wanted to make sure I got it across appropriately. But a bio of Rachel. Rachel is a distinguished clinical hypnotherapist and a midlife crisis coach, passionate about self-advocacy and critical thinking. Now, there's a load more we can go into, but I suppose understanding the whole area of hypnotherapy and midlife crisis coach. And one of the things I struggle on with people who are coaches, right? And I've been a coach myself and I'm qualified in various different things. Like obviously I've worked in sport as a psychologist and a coach, and I qualified as an executive coach and all that kind of stuff. But I really struggle with the fact that there are so many people in the world now who call themselves coaches and very few of them have any life experience. And you can't really coach someone if you haven't lived. There's a line from my favorite movie is a movie called Glengarry Glen Ross, and basically he's bemoaning the boss in the office and says, you've never spent a day in your life. And if you haven't spent a day in your life, you can't, I don't think you have the authority then to help somebody navigate. One thing I think we can safely say about you is that you've spent a day or two.
A week.
Tell me a little bit about the work you do now, and we'll go through, you know, we'll do our best in the time we have to go through your story and the trauma and the loss and the unspeakable cruelty in many ways of things that have happened to you in your life, and yet your passion and your drive to help others and to provide something in the world that's, you know, I always like the idea of leaving the world in a better place than it was when you came in. And I feel like that's very much a kind of a mantra that you live by. So tell me a little bit about the hypnotherapy and the midlife crisis coaching stuff, and then we'll figure out where to go from there.
And it's such a great sort of idea around, do we need lived experience to be able to help people? There's a phrase that comes out of the United States, which is wounded healer. Mm-hmm. And I've had this debate so many times. I still return to the fact that, yes, the more you've lived, the broader your experience, the better the bird's eye view you can have. Mm-hmm. And there's something that happens down here when you are grounded in experience. Because if we try and help people from up here, which is my head, we're using a completely different part of our brains. Mm-hmm. And I like to say the wise old crone with the wart on my nose is the bit that comes into the room with my client. Mm-hmm. And so I strongly believe that my life experience gives me an edge to my work that becomes almost magical. Mm-hmm. And it's almost as if I'm not there at times. It's almost as if I'm just a conduit for some form of reorganization of subconscious structures, for want of a better word, that happens. So it's very, very exciting. And so coaching and hypnotherapy for me come hand in hand. And the coaching component comes because hypnotherapy is so powerful and causes such deep transformational reorganization in the mind that we need some coaching to help us process and sift and sort our way into a new way of being. Mm-hmm. And so my way of working, maybe not like anyone else's, I don't know. But what I do know is that I need to be well. I need to truly take care of myself. And I need to be able to be in that space. So that wisdom that comes with lived experience It took many years for it to cement in. I don't believe me. I didn't walk out of what I walked out of and suddenly I was this person. But more and more and more, I believe that it becomes layered. And there's a part of you that opens up. And I believe it's in everyone. And this is what's really interesting about coaching and therapy and all of these places. There is a place within each of us that I believe taps into ancient wisdoms. Mm-hmm. And I believe that when me and the client enter into this space on an agreement, and we're both fully invested in this space, that something else takes over and there's a magic that happens. And I don't mean magic in the Disney sense. It is I came up with the thing, I was going for a hike one day and I came up with this whole phrase of ionic reorganization. And I said to myself, what on earth does that mean? I have no idea, I've never heard the words. But then I started to look it up, and I think what ionic reorganization is actually the cellular structure reorganizing itself in a basic sense. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I'm at in the work that I do. I'm fascinated with it, Niall. And every single day is, in terms of in the therapy room, is new. It's innovative. It's entrepreneurship. It's heart. It's mind. It's woundedness. And it's a not knowing. And I think the most important part of any work, when you say you believe we need experiences, it's the not knowing. When we don't know anything, that's when everything changes. It's like an organic awakening. It's strange.
It is, and it's I suppose to put a little bit of context, and I'm not going to kind of chronologically go through things that have happened in your life, because I think your book actually explains it far better than anything I could do it justice here. But I do think it's important for people to understand that, I do an awful lot of work around the idea of pivoting, whether it's from a performance point of view or whether it's from a well-being point of view. It's understanding that there's a quote by Aldous Huxley, which says that experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. And in your experiences, and very briefly, we can reference losing, being an entrepreneur at 23 and losing your brother, who you're extraordinarily close to and watching him, as anybody of us who have been touched by cancer know, watching him decline it's an awful experience. Then the love of your life, and the tragedy in an accident there, and then your own personal health issues. And I don't want to turn this into a sob story like the BBC Radio 1 show, and there's always the soft music playing in the background and people tell their story and everybody starts crying. Because you're not that person. I mean, you've had tragedy, and you're certainly not pretending like it's easy or that it doesn't matter. But the tragedy and the challenges you faced in your life have allowed you to do something with your experience that's very different. And I'd love to explore that kind of mindset of, like, you spoke, I listened to you on Dr. Lolly Mancy's podcast show recently, An Entrepreneur Like You, and Lolly's a friend to this show, and you spoke so eloquently about when you lost your husband and the difficulty you had in like just in breathing, just in the day to day, and you were pregnant at the time, and the challenge you had with with being present for the unborn child, and all these kind of things, right, that anybody who's had loss can relate to. But to take all these experiences you've had and to come through, to kind of suffer loss is one thing, but then to have your own health issues and the extraordinary challenges you had around there, instead of becoming a victim or becoming broken or saying that, life is cruel and it's not fair. And, I really struggle with people who talk about things being fair, because I don't know where the concept of something being fair ever came from, because I kind of feel like life is about survival. But all of these experiences have shaped who you are, but they've led you into a career now of giving back to other people. And, you'd probably be forgiven for being a bit selfish after everything you've been through and say, sod that, it's my turn to be taken care of. What is it, do you think, about all of those like unconscionable kind of tragedies that you've had in your life that have allowed you to come to the point where you actually have this, you appear to have this clarity of what's important? And help me understand, is there any one part of any one of those experiences, or is it a collective of the having to go through it all? Or how has it worked for you, do you think?
It's such an interesting question to ask, because it's one I have puzzled. And I think there's layers to it. There's something that I stumbled upon recently, and this is sort of as an aside, and I'll come into the other bit in a minute. When we go through major trauma, particularly from early on in life, our nervous systems get very used to operating on a sort of a flick level, because we're operating on cortisol and adrenaline as opposed to dopamine, serotonin, all of the nicey hormones, oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And I'd been thinking in the last year, why did I come out of 2 decades of serious trauma, which nearly took my own life. It took my brother, it took my husband, and giving birth alone, and becoming paralyzed from a brain tumor, and having prescription drug dependency. What gave me the energy to continue? Now we can say, there was a spark within me. We can use the cliches, but what I came to recognize probably a year ago was I was still fueled initially on this survival instinct. Okay, so it's like I stumbled back into the planet or onto Earth, still operating at 100 miles an hour. And I think that was initially, if I'm truly deeply honest, is where the crucible for that was formed. I could not sit down and have a sherry and a biscuit. I mean, that would have killed me, the boredom of it, to be honest. I was used to literally living by the threadbare pants of life, and I was living on emotional crumbs. I mean, it simply was not ideal for a young woman. So I think part of it was driven out of this. I'm still operating on this energy level, and I remembered then, of course, at 23, I came back from the UK. I left school really early because I needed to escape my family, my father predominantly. And so I had no formal skills. I went over to the UK. I learnt the hotel industry inside out, came back. We had an old house, borrowed the money, and I just set up a restaurant overnight. It was a great success. I didn't make any money, but it was a great success.
That's an interesting one we'll explore later. What success means.
What success means. So I think that I had that in me. My family were travelers, explorers. They were adventurers. They weren't people who sat and smoked pipes. So I think it was a combination of that. But in me, from a very young age, when I was 12, I had read all the nursing books. Right, I was medically incredibly up to speed. I was always going in that direction. I swiftly fit in a couple of years of psychotherapy training between the tragedies. I fit in about 12 months of acupuncture training between Nick dying and a brain tumor. So I was already headed that way. And what happened really initially was I woke up one day and I suddenly became aware, hell, I lost the use of my left hand and my arm. And I had to get up one morning and brush my teeth with the right hand. What happened? And that was the beginning of this energy of curiosity. And, Basil van der Kolk, which is The Body Keeps the Score, which is one of the major, trauma books at the moment. He kind of says that curiosity is much later in terms of trauma recovery. For me, that wasn't so. I became very curious. And I suddenly became very curious about how on earth can this be possible in this body? How can you take a portion of my brain out and have me pretty functional? And then as I recovered from prescription drug dependency, I had a brain that was firing on so many cylinders. It was ridiculous. And it was said to me that you will never really be able to function on, any level of work. I was in a meeting not long after, I was recovering from brain injury, and it was to do with insurance. And the question was, will Rachel Gotto ever be able to work again? And it was straight across, everybody said, absolutely no way. And I remember sitting there like a stooge and agreeing with them. Because I wasn't functional. But slowly over time, my mental functions returned to an acute level. It became so acute, I was able to remember telephone numbers and how and why. So that was what was the beginning of this force. So it began, I think, on adrenaline and cortisol. It became curiosity. And my heart was always open to healing. I was always the person who gave money industry. I always worried about people. So I think what was happening is we were getting the whole caboose and we were bringing it forwards until one day I was well enough to say, okay, what next? What next? I had an ambition probably in 2012, maybe 2011. Yes, was I would like to smile again. That was an ambition of mine. I would like to smile naturally again. So we came from that, and I was gathering momentum all the way until I feel that I had somehow processed an enormous amount of it. I'm still traumatized. I won't pretend I'm not. But I processed enough that there were other factors that were reawakened in me, which were innate, but they had bells and whistles now. I had an ability to see and look at people which was different because of where I'd been. I'd been in a place where my mind turned against me, where I was quite simply mad. And the only conversation that was going on in my head was between me and some dark black entity that was instructing me to take Nicola and my mum and myself. So it's a long-winded answer to your question.
It's a really interesting answer. Because
I think it's formed from a lot of different points.
Well, what's really interesting is, I often talk about depression or suicidal leanings, and I kind of feel like we're all susceptible to any of those emotions, and generally speaking, it's the difference between the people who succumb to them and the people who survive them is whatever capacity they have in that moment to access, help or a notion that a reminder of something that's worth living for, or whatever the case may be. I think it's fascinating, these conversations, because these are conversations that don't happen. People don't talk about the dark thoughts because you used the word mad there a minute ago, and that would be the thing, that it would be dismissed as there's something wrong with you. Stay away from her, she's barking. We don't want to get into that one. But like, if you were to look at the experience you had, and I mentioned like nursing your brother, and I mention it because having listened to the podcast and having read your book, I found it fascinating. And I can absolutely relate. I mean, I haven't had the level of tragedy that you've had in your life, but I've had my own challenges and traumas. Some things I've never spoken about, and some things I do. But what I find really interesting is, like, you articulated the complete, if we take Nick's passing, you articulated the devastation in a way that was visceral. I genuinely, I was listening to it on a train, and I actually shed a tear listening to it, because it was powerful stuff. But it was also something I could understand, in that complete inability to function. Like, the sense of loss was so severe. And what I'm really interested in is, to nurse your brother when you're a young woman, and he was like a year older than you, and you were like virtually like twins, I believe. You were very close. But to go through that experience, and that's a devastating experience, and then a few short years later, you meet Nick, and then you develop this perfect life, and then he's taken away from you, and that's very hard to understand. And then you wander into this kind of recovery, and start to figure out your life, and then this illness hits you, and at some point people talk about resilience, and I get really frustrated when people talk about resilience, because I kind of feel like inherently we are all resilient. I mean, we've been through 2 years of a lockdown pandemic. We've got a couple of different wars going on. We're facing a potential world war now because Iran are getting involved in the mess that's going on in Palestine. And, we get on every day. And then our youth are bombarded every day on these things with negative message after negative message after negative message. And social media has created the angriest generation of people we've ever had, because everybody's polarized and fighting about this, that, and the other. And in the middle of all of that, you have found a path to what I feel is some level of peace, if that's the right word, through your support of other people. And one thing I find really interesting, I studied psychotherapy when I did my master's in psychology. I also kind of explored the possibility of doing therapy at the time. And I ended up coming to a conclusion that I didn't like people enough to be a therapist. I didn't want to listen to their problems. But for somebody who's had that much trauma, to then go and sit down and help other people through their trauma, help me a little bit understand that. Like, how do you look after you when you're sitting there listening to this, considering the volume of difficulty and events that you've had to deal with in your life?
It's something that I've never struggled with, and I'm curious about it too. When I work, I hear some of the most devastating stories, so many broken lives, so many broken dreams, so much violence, particularly in rural Irish homes, funny enough, from my age group, particularly in women. And I have something that I believe came out of trauma, which is the ability to listen, the ability to imagine, the ability to almost absorb in a cellular way, but there's a boundary that is there. And actually, what happens for me, particularly when I'm working with my hypnotherapy clients, is I come away feeling incredibly restored. And, there's a talk about empaths are really good for therapy work. I'm not an empath. I don't absorb other people's pain. And I think that is a very, very important point. If you're going to be working in this area, you do have to have this boundary. I have a shield in me. I think out of the 500 clients I worked with on a one-to-one basis, I think probably there's 2 occasions that I have left the day with them with me. I have cried with my clients. I have been there in the room with them. I'm very, real in the sense of that. It's not that I'm cold or detached. It's that I have a job to do. And I'm sitting in my role with my hat on. And my job is to be the bird's eye view. I'm there to be a detective. I'm there to see what we can move. What are the chess pieces that we can reorganize? And particularly with the subconscious, because we know so much about the subconscious drivers. And just going back to depression and all of those, the anxiety and all of the difficulties that people live with. There's so much that is resounding in the unconscious mind, which are hidden, soundless voices that are disturbing people's ability to find that help, to make the decisions, to change the chess pieces around. So I see it that I have a job to do. So I'm in my role. Later on, it's different. I'm a different person, but I'm a professional, and I must do my job. And I find that my energy is formed through this, as I said, this alliance, this therapeutic alliance. It's quite something else. And the more I work in this area, the more I believe in the importance of the right fit. It's so important. There's this sort of idea that you ring a therapist. I say to my clients, ring at least 3 or 4. What does your gut tell you? Because I'm really big into what our gut, we are taught to ignore our gut every single day of the week. It's bred out of us. But when you're investing in helping yourself, when you're investing in making deep changes in your life, you want to be with somebody who you feel you can simply go on a proper psychological dance with. I was in psychotherapy personally for 25 years. I found it absolutely brilliant because I love to talk, right? But I was never fixed. And this was my crux, was how can I be with really, really amazing therapists, but never fix? And this is where I got to. We're all headed to the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind. Every therapy is headed that way, to find the unconscious drivers. I just found that hypnotherapy was quite simply like a laser beam, because we can simply ask that question. I'm going off topic, I know, but it's just that we want to help people in the swiftest way possible. And that's my job. So I'm in there emotionally, but I am working from my solar plexus. As I said, there's a big difference. And when I first began formal coaching, which I don't do anymore, I was constantly thinking, what's the killer question? You know, the training, right? The killer question, the killer question. So consequently, I did a rubbish job because I wasn't working with my gut. I threw all of that out the window and I went back to what I know to be true. We sit, we wait, we observe, and we create the energy. And it's that energy between you and me that makes the conversation. It's that energy between me and the client that makes the whole thing shift.
Tell me a little bit about hypnotherapy. I had a friend in when I lived in Toronto who was very much a fan of past life regression and using hypnosis for past life regression, which I found fascinating. You know, just the concept of it. And I always consider myself to be pretty open-minded about things. You know, so I never dismiss anything. I take a very simple view of life. That I think the problem when you hear like I always give the example of like religion and science poo-pooing each other. And I kind of go, I'm not so arrogant to think I know that either of them are completely wrong. You know, there might well be a God dictating everything. I'm not sure I particularly believe in it, but there might be. I'm not going to dismiss anyone's right to believe in that. And similarly, you know, science has proven a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that they say is proven, which in 20, 30, 40 years time will be disproven because technology will be better and they'll prove something different. So it's not a definitive fact. So if we allow the fact that if I like to think of myself as living in a world of possible. Do ghosts exist? I don't think so, but possibly, who knows? I'm not arrogant enough to say absolutely not. What I find really interesting about hypnosis is I have seen the impact of it. And again, you get a lot of people who go, oh no, it's a load of nonsense. And then other people go, it's the only thing that I can function with, you know. And I've seen the impact and you see it as a trick on stage and all that kind of stuff. But talk to me a little bit about hypnotherapy and what actually happens in a session where if somebody's coming to you for therapy, how do you use hypnosis as is it to access the subconscious, or how does it work, or how do you even build enough trust to develop that?
Well, building enough trust goes back to a good alliance, doesn't
true.
it?
Yeah,
you got to like the person, you've got to feel that you can trust them, you've got to feel, and also you see, this is where the life experience comes in, you've got to feel that somebody has the grown up, professional, mature energy, because you're entrusting your private world and your vulnerability, and the stories you hear are incredibly vulnerable, and this shame that's never been shared. So first of all, it begins with a very good relationship. And from then on, hypnotherapy, very simply, as humans, we're incredibly suggestible. We are responding to internal suggestions every single day of our lives. Hypnotherapy is about giving ourselves better suggestions. Okay? So we are responding to unconscious drivers every single day. And the quickest route to understand how the subconscious mind governs us, I'm sure you've driven home and you get home and you cannot remember the drive. You just go, okay, you're coming home in a program. Your brain knows the route, knows how to do the indicator, and so on and so on. So that's a subconscious program. It's installed, it's routined in, and the more you entrench it, the more we're able to respond to it. So the same with emotional drivers, okay? So these emotional drivers They're what are governing our everyday experience. They're causing our emotions, our physical responses, they're causing our fears, our anxieties, low moods, and so on. So hypnotherapy is about short-circuiting the route to that unconscious mind. All therapies are heading that way. We all want to know what is the root cause. So when we know we're suggestible, but how about we understand that when we're in hypnosis, which is simply a relaxed state of mind, asking the 5% of the mind, the conscious mind, to go and have a cup of coffee so that we can hop into the unconscious mind and ask specific questions. Once that 5%, the unconscious mind, has gone off for that coffee, we are open to so much more suggestion. That is the governor general, the conscious mind. It's pragmatic, it's lateral thinking, you know it. So it protects us, but so does our unconscious mind. So our job is to say, the mind knows exactly where you've acquired everything. You have stored all the information in your nervous system since conception, which is so interesting. Now, it's not labeled with files, it's all in a jumble, but our unconscious mind knows exactly the genesis of an issue. And before the age of 8, we're in what they call theta mode, which means it's before conscious discernment. It's before we're able to say something's right or wrong, good, bad, dangerous. And so we form our belief systems about ourselves and the world through our lived experiences. So most of our pivotal belief systems are embedded and entrenched by about the age of 8. And of course, then we've got them stacked and experiences on top of that. So hypnotherapy, we can simply say, where did that begin? Where did that first stem from? And it's so interesting now what you go back to. For instance, years ago, I had a woman who simply could not give up sugar. We went straight back to sitting on the wall on a Friday afternoon, swinging her legs. Father comes home from work. First thing he does is go into the sweetie shop and give her a bar. That was the only time her father ever really acknowledged her or recognized her. So she had an unconscious drive to go back to happiness. So actually, this woman was suffering from low moods. It was nothing to do with her weight. She didn't feel lovable. She didn't feel good enough. She didn't feel recognized, and so on. So when we find that out, the first thing we do is we discredit the belief, the connection to it, because the brain does not know the difference between the past, the present, or the future. It simply runs information. So the information is, you are not good enough. You're not lovable, right? So what we do is, while the client is under hypnosis, we have the client out loud say, that's not me anymore. So we're instructing that program that actually I'm a grown-up, I'm 47 now, I'm a woman, I have a job, and so on and so on. So what we do is we target it, we discredit it, and the important job then is we must overwrite that. So it's simply like the computer. If we don't upgrade the hard drive, we're never going to get a new program. So what we're doing is, you can't allow a neural circuitry it won't wither off and die. But we want to install new circuitry, a new belief. I am beautiful, I'm worthy, I'm incredible. Look at all my skills. So how do we do that? We record a bespoke hypnosis audio for each client. They go into hypnosis every time, they listen to it, and they listen twice a day for a month. So we are beginning all of the transformation under hypnosis, but we revisit it daily, because we know through neuroscience, it actually takes 6 months to fully embed new beliefs, new behaviors. A month is the beginning of it.
That's really fascinating. And it's, you're absolutely right, actually. We are the words we use to describe ourselves. And it's fascinating. And I get, it's like every conversation I have with people for this show, I repeatedly get reminded of how I'm really good at telling people what to do, but not necessarily doing it. And I have somebody helping me kind of try to develop a brand thing at the moment, and I'm allergic to all that kind of stuff. But I go, I can't do that, I'm rubbish at that. And they go, no, you're not allowed to say that anymore. It's, it may not be your skill set, but change the way you frame it. And I've done this so often with other people, but never through hypnosis. And I find that fascinating. And I have heard a lot of talk about how you can access, and I mean, I've heard about people who give up smoking through going for hypnosis and stuff like that. And I think it's really interesting. I guess what I find really interesting too is, if I try to relate this to the corporate world, And the ultimate goal of this show is for us to constantly have conversations about making the world of work better, make it more human, access a more inclusive environment so that people of whatever challenge or label or diversity have an opportunity to go to work, feel included, and deliver their best performance without being damaged. That's really kind of in simplicity. And one thing you spoke about there really resonates with me, and that was about the sense here. And I've had this kind of thing a few times, and sometimes people look at me like I'm a little bit strange, but I do a lot of work with a neuroscientist in America, a guy called Paul Zak, and Paul did an interview for us recently, and I just love talking to him because he's an incredibly smart man. But he has done an awful lot of work around the idea of measuring trust in organizations and understanding how high trust organizations function so much better than low trust. And it's exactly the same as if you're related to relationships. You know, if you've got a high trust relationship, an awful lot of the noise and nonsense and suffering that goes on in relationships doesn't exist because there's a reason there's high trust, right? But what you're talking about there, I think, is very relatable to the corporate space, particularly when we think about, like, I'm a great fan of championing difference, and we look at neurodiversity, or, you know, and I kind of repeat myself in every episode, but we look at this kind of idea that there's only some small population are, you know, different, and then the rest are all the same. It's complete nonsense, right? But I feel that as part of the path to better communication and better leadership and better inclusivity is conversations around understanding what's happening here and how we can help each other to get around that. And by that I mean an awful lot of the challenges we have come down to emotions and come down to perceptions. And maybe it's you know, you think somebody's talking about you behind your back. The reality is they haven't even thought about you. They're not even not talking about you. You're not even on their radar. Yeah. But you've got this in your head. And then there's this whole kind of battle that goes on where actual conversations to acknowledge, well, what's going on in you? Before you go deal with the person who's talking about you, let's figure out, you know, I give you an example actually, and I just want to get your opinion on this. Is I did I gave a talk recently where I was talking to people who were looking to change their habits. And I do this whole thing around sustainable habits and the idea that we reward what we repeat. And that's why bad habits are much easier to get into than good habits and all that kind of stuff. But I spoke about weight loss. And I have this kind of philosophy of, if you're going to change a habit, you first of all have to understand, well, what's your genuine motivation for wanting to do it? And we had this conversation with this particular client I was working with, who was an executive I was coaching, but this weight loss thing became part of the conversation. It was a corporate thing, but it was also, they were massively overweight. So they wanted to lose weight. So I said, why do you want to lose weight? And the motivation I felt was important to understand, well, if this is going to be sustainable, you have to be driven to do it because there's a lot of hard work ahead. So you have to want to do it, right? So it's like somebody coming to you to do their therapy. If you're not bought into the therapy, you're wasting your time. And it's equally in the corporate space. If you're not bought into the change that you're trying to achieve, it's not going to happen. But what I found really interesting was, you know, there's that concept of the 5 whys lead you to the truth. If you ask the question why 5 times, you get to the truth. Well, I just started with them and I said, well, why do you want to lose weight? And they said, there's a family wedding coming up and I want to, you know, look good at the family wedding. And I, well, why do you want to look good at the family wedding? And well, because I, you know, want to impress people and whatever. And you go, why does impressing people matter? And you go, well, because there's people I went to school with and I haven't seen them for 20 years. And I was young and fit and whatever. And now I'm grossly overweight and I hate how I look. And you go, well, why do you hate how you look? And suddenly the conversation went from impressing people wearing a slim fit suit at a wedding to a whole self-esteem thing. And it became about the self-image and the self-esteem and understanding that actually what you want is to feel healthier. You've got no energy. You feel you're really negative about yourself. You're now coming down on yourself and you're giving yourself a hard time, et cetera, et cetera. And the conversation went from this initial thing about I want to go on a diet or I want to exercise more to I want to feel better about who I am as a person. And actually the weight was only one aspect of it. How they were as a person came back to, they spent too much hours. The reason they put on so much weight was they spent 20 hours in the office. They didn't see their kids. Their marriage was in trouble. You know, there was all sorts of layers. They were eating takeaways because they were sitting at their desk eating instead of going home and having a meal with their family, all these kind of things. So the habits that needed to change weren't about weight at all. But the weight loss came from being healthier, from getting out and walking around the block a couple of times a day, from turning your phone off an hour before you get home, so you actually are present with your family and not in work mode when you sat down to dinner, spending time with your family, putting your kids to bed. Little things that have no relation to losing weight, but have massive relation to being healthy and happier and whatever. That's a long-winded way of me getting to a question. But I guess I'm fascinated because when you're in this therapeutic role, and I mean, it's human nature. There has to be times when somebody is in your office or wherever it is that you work from, whether it's home or office, whatever. But there have to be times when you are taken back to the things you've been through, and you're listening to somebody complaining about something that must seem quite trivial or something. And how do you park, like, how do you not fall into the human nature thing of going, Jesus, you think you have it hard?
You should hear about this.
Let me take you down my road, you know.
Exactly. That's in training. I mean, this is the difference between being a professional and not. And quite simply, I have a job to do. And I have a ritual that I go through before I receive my client, be it online or whatever. I have a beautiful singing bowl I picked up in Kathmandu. It's tuned to the heart frequency, okay? I have sprays that I use which are clearing the atmosphere. I have a moment where I literally see a center plumb line going down through the middle of me. And I see it landing in my solar plexus. And I quite simply divest myself of everything that does not serve me in the room at this particular moment in time. I am so serious about the investment my client makes to come and see me, that my responsibility is to make sure that I am in the best place possible to serve them. So the truthful answer is no, I don't, because I prepare myself every day. And a couple of weeks ago, I still have physical aspects to some of the physical difficulties that I had. Particularly, I suffer from incredible insomnia because of the brain injury. I had to clear a whole week of clients because I was not getting sufficient downtime at night to be able to do my job. I won't have people come into my room unless I'm ready for them. Because some people have saved money. Some people have switched things around to be able to afford this work. So I would like to think that I would need to get out of the business if I wasn't doing that every day. I don't have a why me or a that shouldn't have happened gene in my body. I just don't. I have a what's next gene. And I have, oh, what's that over there gene? And I've got a curious gene. I don't have...
What do you attribute that to?
I don't really know. I think that I think it's born out of having nothing left. Quite simply, nothing left. Going back to that, I want to smile again. I mean, that's a very basic requirement that we'd all imagine. You know, we would never think that deeply. I've sat on the stairs and I've felt so damn blank and grey and almost invisible, where I wondered, you know, am I actually here at all? Almost, you know, I was so watered down. Such were my experiences that I had to simply pick up cells almost and it took time, you know, this energy of knowing where I'm going or what I want to do, or even staying sustained with a sustainable energy. It it was simply a reforming of a person. I am not Niall. If you could see me before all of this happened to me, I know what trajectory I was on. It would not have been who I am. I would never have liked myself. Dare I say it, I would never have been able to say, you're a great person. I really like you. I think you're an incredible woman. That would not have been in my narrative, because my narrative was all, self-praise is no praise. You'll never get anywhere. So it was a completely different kind of avenue. Whereas when you've lost every single thing almost in your life, it's almost a blank canvas. And yes, okay, I could have gone another way, and I could have said, why me? I could see journeys, I could see adventures, I could see people, I could see so many things that I wanted to be part of. And I couldn't do boring. I could never do boring. So I was already born to join the ranks. And believe me, I do have imposter syndrome at times, because, hey, I just stumbled back onto the earth at 47. And here I am helping people with the responsibility of this. I'm speaking to people and organizations, and I've written about it in my book. Sometimes I do go, Christ, you're winging into this, aren't you, girl? But when it boils down to it, it's I think, people talk about coming home to themselves, and I agree with that. Yes, we do need to come home, but I think it's about trying our best to form a benevolent relationship internally. That's kind of halfway decent and kind to ourselves. When the handle fell off my teapot, 10 years ago, I'd have gone, you stupid, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh my God, you poor thing. How, so the internal world is so different to what was there. And so I think it's all crumbs. We bring it all back together and we make a loaf of bread, for want of a strange analogy.
I like that. I think I suppose because I know your story, I kind of absolutely resonate with all of that. And I also feel, and I want you to give your book a push there now in a second.
Which I entirely forgot to bring, of course.
Of course, but don't worry about that. We'll but I think people will enjoy reading it. And it would have been easy in this conversation to spend 10 minutes talking about your brother, 20 minutes talking about Nick, then talking about your health, but I think it's what's really important for people to hear from this is the fact that we all have our challenges in life, and we all go through things that derail us and sometimes can be debilitating, and but that we have a choice about how we respond to that. And I gave a talk once, Epictetus, there's a quote attributed to Epictetus that life isn't what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you, which is quite similar to the Huxley one. And I said this on stage at an event, and this one lady got really upset with me and said, how dare you, it's like, sorry, it's, yeah. No, it's not the event, but your opinion of it that causes suffering. That's what it was. And I said, it's not the event, but your opinion of it that causes suffering. And this woman got really upset with me because she had just lost her mother. And coming to this auditorium and this panel discussion was her first time out of the house since her mother passed away. And obviously it was devastating. And her whole thing was, this event is like, destroyed my life kind of thing. And I'm kind of going, well, when I say that, I don't mean that the event of losing your mother isn't important. I mean, that obviously, but it's your ability to find a way to function off the back of that event. And I'm going to wrap up shortly, but I did want to give just one opportunity, just briefly, to mention Nick, because I think you explained it so incredibly. But the idea that somebody wanders into your life who is, to all intents and purposes, your soulmate, right? Like ticks every box and has the same kind of philosophy about life and was a sailor, and like I said, you ended up in Ireland because your parents were sailing to New Zealand and stopped off in West Cork. I mean, it's a brilliant story. And everybody go read the book. But then to lose Nick in the ocean on like you're there in the boat and he's taking a team of people diving and something goes wrong and Nick doesn't come back up. To have found that and off the back of it only being shortly after you'd nursed your brother and there's the whole, we can build it up into whatever emotional way we want, but I guess what's your take on all this on I suppose when I make this statement about it's not the event but your opinion of it, or it's what was the other thing I said? The experience is what happens to you, it's what you do, what happens to you. But when you lose something that is like so integral to your happiness, what is it that you think you've accessed that has allowed you to channel that into the person you are now, allowing for the fact that you had other life challenges.
Yeah.
That wasn't the end of it, and it's like everything's been sunshine and roses since. But what do you think you've accessed in yourself that has allowed you to you used the phrase smile again, and that it took you a long time to actually want to smile? What is it that you think you've accessed within you that has allowed you to do that? And for people listening, and particularly people listening who may be having their own struggles, what is one piece of advice you can give them to understand that there's another way or there's another path, maybe?
I think rather than tapping into something, I think that I worked very, very hard to keep my heart open to life. When metaphorical bombs go off, there's obviously a reverb. And to sort of segue off for a second, don't forget, I had a lot of downtime. And I'm a great believer that when we have immense experiences, and to use the old word, fantastic experiences, that almost suggests it's positive, but fantastic is just enormous. We have a dilution of ourselves. That's my experience, that we're scattered to the four winds. And if we turn to nature and the animal kingdom, we can gain a lot of wisdom. An animal who has had an injury or a shock or has had a threat to its life, he actually goes under a bush, he shakes, and he stays there until he's well enough to come out again to face the world. I did a lot of that. I'm not a person, you can tell if I'm not feeling well. It's written all over me. I'm not able to pretend. I'm not an actress in that way. I'm real. So it's a two-part answer. I think what came with the downtime and the sitting in the horror of it stopped it being boxed and put away somewhere deep and dark. Now, don't get me wrong, there were boxes I had to open through therapy, but I stayed open to the experience. I didn't turn my back on any of it. I couldn't. I was forced to face it because there was another one, bam, and another one, bam, to wake up paralyzed, after 15 years in neurosurgery, bam. So what I would say, if I was talking to somebody, if I knew what I was going to be facing, should we say we were looking at 24-year-old Rachel again, I would say, sit in deep. Sit down into this. It's like a massive friggin' storm, girl, and it is going to howl around you. But you, as the core essence of who you are, is never going to be damaged. It is always going to be there. There's a lovely quote, because you like quotes. The human spirit is stronger than anything that can happen to it. It's anonymous. Yeah. And that would be what I would offer comfort to say, yes, this is shitty. Yes, this is absolutely devastating you. But I promise you, there's a part of you there which is undamaged. And that is the part that will begin to pick up the pieces. But allow your experience, allow your loss, allow your trauma. It's part of your life. Don't push it away. And allow it its space to stay functional of the things, the pillars you were speaking about earlier. You know, we get some exercise if we can. We try and eat as best we can. We try and sleep if we can. We get support where we can. We have trusted confidence if we can. So we build a toolbox around ourselves. Something will work one day and it won't work the next. And we inch our way. We inch our way towards when the storm clouds are starting to be less black. But we don't have to be doing personal development work at this time. We don't have to be bettering ourselves. We're not on a, beating ourselves with the whip, with the hair shirt. That is not what we're at. We're about pacing, checking in, tenderness, if we can be compassionate in our inner voice even. And peace as much as you possibly can. It's so scary to take peace when your mind is raging, when this bomb has gone off in your life, when nothing is right, when you've lost everything, when you've no money. It's so tempting to not ever want to be still. But you will know yourself in that stillness, and it becomes less frightening, and it becomes actually a resource place. Because the world will tell you how to do this and that, and you should and you must and you could. But actually, at the end of the day, internally, you kind of know what you need. You kind of know what you require, what your soul, what your physiology, what your biology, what your psychology needs. So I would say, try and keep your heart open if you can. It's hard. Try to say, this is bloody life. This is life. There's no jinx. And work with your toolbox and use it and play with it. It's going to be hard. But just like me, the sun does shine and your cheeks do rise again and you do smile and you do have joy and fun and curiosity and you start again. You have new love, you have new life, you have new journeys, new adventures, new businesses.
What a fabulous message to leave it on. Rachel, I really appreciate the permission to talk about some of these things that you've been through and for letting, for this not long enough period of time to wander into your world. But brilliant conversation. I really loved it. I can't go without you telling everyone about the name of your book and where to get it.
Of course, I always forget. I'm dreadful. You can tell I'm not a promoter. I didn't even bring it. The teapot broke and that was the end of it. My book is Flying on the Inside. It's a memoir of trauma and recovery. And yeah, it's a dark story, but at the end, there's a lot of stuff that you can use. So if you are going through really difficult times, skip to the end and see what yin yoga, I should mention, is one powerful tool for trauma processing later on, not in the midst of it. And you can find me on Instagram at Rachel V. Gotto, website Rachel Gotto, LinkedIn Rachel Gotto. I'm Rachel Gotto all over the place. And Niall, thank you. It's been a lovely conversation. I'm so delighted to be here. It really has been lovely.
Well, the feeling's mutual and hopefully the listeners will enjoy it also. Thanks for tuning in and we'll see you again on Inertia Crazies.